You've probably heard the word poverty thrown around a lot, right? But what does it actually mean? Is it really just about not having enough money, or is there a whole lot more to the story? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. We'll look at how this really complex human condition is defined, how it's measured, and how it's understood. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's start with a number. A number that's pretty simple, but also really shocking. $1.90. That's it. This is what the World Bank calls the International Poverty Line. It's meant to be the absolute bare minimum a person needs to survive per day. And get this, back in 2018, almost 8% of all the workers in the world and their families were living on less than this. Just let that sink in for a second.
But even the World Bank, the people who set that number, admit that poverty is so much more than just a dollar amount. They call it a pronounced deprivation in well-being. And what that really means is it's not just about having an empty wallet. It's about the day-in, day-out struggle for your health, for education, for just a little bit of basic dignity. It's something that affects pretty much every single part of a person's life.
So let's peel back the layers here. What are all the different parts that make up poverty, and how do we get past just looking at income to really understand its true scope? We're going to start by looking at all the different faces of this problem.
See, poverty isn't just one problem. It's more like a tangled web of challenges all stuck together. Sure, low income is the start, but that leads to not being able to get basic things you need. It means poor health and not much education, which then makes it even harder to find a decent job. It's the daily fight to get clean water. It's not feeling safe. And, this is a big one, it's that feeling of being voiceless, like you have no power to change anything. Each one of these things makes the others worse, creating this cycle that's just incredibly hard to break out of.
And to give you a sense of the scale, just look at these numbers. In 2011, almost 22% of India's massive population was living below its own national poverty line. And then globally, as we said, about 8% of the world's workers were below that international line in 2018. These aren't just statistics on a chart, right? We're talking about hundreds of millions of people, each with their own story.
So how in the world do you measure something so complicated? Well, to do that, you first have to understand the two main ways poverty is classified. They're kind of like two sides of the same coin, but they tell very, very different stories about what's going on. Let's break them down. First up, we've got absolute poverty. The easiest way to think about this is it's the survival line. It's a fixed standard, like that $1.90 a day we talked about, that's supposed to apply everywhere in the world. It asks a really simple question. Do you have enough to get the bare minimum you need to just stay alive? Food, water, shelter. That's it. It's all about pure, basic subsistence. And then, on the other side, you have relative poverty. Now, this one isn't about just surviving. It's about being able to participate in your society. It measures your standard of living compared to everyone else around you. So you could totally be above the absolute poverty line, but you might still be in relative poverty if you can't afford the things that are considered normal where you live. Really, it's a way of measuring the gap between the haves and the have-nots within a specific country.
Okay, so just to recap, absolute poverty is that universal yardstick. It lets us compare extreme hardship across totally different countries. But relative poverty? That's all about context. It tells us about the social and economic inequality inside a single country. You really need both to get the full picture.
All right, so that's the theory. But what does this all look like in the real world? Let's zoom in and take a closer look at how one country with over 1 billion people even starts to tackle the huge job of measuring poverty. Let's look at India as our case study.
So in India, the main group responsible for figuring out the poverty line is a task force at NITI Aayog, which is the government's big policy think tank. But they don't go out and collect the data themselves. That incredibly important job falls to the National Sample Survey Office, or the NSSO. These are the folks who conduct massive surveys in households all across the country.
And here's a really fascinating and super important detail about how India does it. The poverty line there isn't based on what people earn, it's based on what they spend. And you might wonder why. Well, in an economy where so many people work in the informal sector, incomes can be really irregular and hard to track. So looking at what a family consumes or spends is seen as a much more stable and accurate way to figure out their actual standard of living.
But they didn't always have this more detailed approach. The way the poverty line has been defined in India has actually changed a lot over the decades. It's evolved as our understanding of what it really means to be poor has gotten deeper. Let's trace that evolution.
This timeline really shows a big shift in thinking. Way back in 1979, the Alagh Committee kept it super simple. They basically defined the poverty line as the amount of money you needed to get enough calories to not starve.
But over time, other committees, like the Tendulkar and Rangarajan ones, realized that, hey, people need more than just food to live a decent life. So they started expanding the definition to include other essential expenses, like education, healthcare, and even transportation. It created a much more complete picture of poverty.
So, after all that evolution, where did things end up? Well, according to the Rangarajan Committee's report from 2014, the poverty line was set at a monthly spending of 972 rupees per person in rural areas and 1,407 rupees in urban areas. These are the actual numbers that, at that time, decided who was officially considered poor in India and who could get government help.
And that really brings us right back to where we started. We've seen how these lines are drawn from that global $190 a day to the super detailed methods used in India. But whether you measure it in dollars or rupees, can a single number ever really capture the complex, multi-layered, and deeply human experience of what it means to be poor? It's a question worth thinking about, and it's a good reminder that behind every single